Batman is arguably the most popular character in fiction, and with the DCU up and running, there's no doubt in my mind that we're going to get a Batman saga within this universe. And in this highly requested video, I'm going to be giving you guys my ideal DCU Batman saga. And just to add clarity, the reason why this video took so long for me to make is because of the fact that I kind of already made this video over on the Hive Mind account, and it was the Batfamily saga. However, in that video, I only made it so that it fit one chapter, and I basically capped it off at one Batman trilogy. That being said, I do think that there's a lot of potential for the DCU Batman to get more than just one trilogy, very similar to Tom Holland's Spider-Man. So in this video, I'm going to be extending that same saga and adding the projects that I would add for the second half. I'm also going to go over the first half of the saga as well, so you don't have to worry about going back to watch that video. You can just watch this video in its entirety. But very quickly, before we get into the video, please be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and share, and also hit the hype button if you guys have that feature available. It would mean a lot. And if you want to follow me on my other socials, you can do so because the link to that will be in the description. Diving right into the saga, even though the DCU Batman hasn't yet appeared in live action, his mark has already been left over the universe. And that's because not only did we get a brief cameo in Creature Commandos, we also got two of his rogues in Creature Commandos as well, in Dr. Phosphorus and Clayface. This brings me to the first project in this saga, which is the Clayface horror film, which is set to come out in September of 2026. So far, all we know about this film is that it's going to be an origin story for Clayface and basically tell us the tragic events that led to his transformation. Because of this, we can logically assume that this will be a prequel in the DCU Batman's continuity. Now, while it's unclear whether or not Batman will actually appear in this movie, I still think that it's a very high chance that we potentially see him for a brief cameo or even a couple of scenes. And that's because even though the DCU Batman hasn't been cast yet to our knowledge, Clayface still has a ways to go until its release, so they could easily cast the DCU Batman for an upcoming project like Man of Tomorrow and then film scenes for him in Clayface, which would still have more than enough time to be edited and implemented into the film, considering that the scenes would probably be minor. This would also make sense considering that the writer of this movie, Mike Flanagan, said that he was inspired by B-Taz's Feet of Clay episodes, which heavily involve Batman. And even more recent reports are saying that this story is taking heavy inspiration from Batman One Bad Day, Clayface. And in that story, Batman shows up at the end to confront Clayface after all of the crimes that he committed. I can definitely see Batman playing a role in that capacity, very similar to Darth Vader in Rogue One. Next up in the saga, we have the project that I genuinely believe that the DCU Batman will appear in, and that is Man of Tomorrow. So far, what we know about this film is that Lex Luthor and Superman are going to be putting their differences to the side to team up against Brainiac. Because of Brainiac being a large-scale planetary threat, it's being rumored that a lot of heroes are going to make appearances in this film, including the likes of the Justice Gang that appeared in Superman 2025. Because of this, again, there has now been speculation that Wonder Woman is going to be cast in this film, and that's been reported by very reputable source Apocalyptic Horseman, who's been right about 98% of his DCU takes. And it's also being rumored that Batman is going to join Wonder Woman in this film as well, and that would make a lot of sense because if Wonder Woman's going to come all the way from Themyscira to help Superman, I don't see why Batman would have a hard time traveling to the next city to help Superman. It's also important to note that Apocalyptic Horseman has said that he's heard that an important male role is being cast for Man of Tomorrow as well, though he's not sure if it's a villain or a hero. And he said that this role is going to be a character that reoccurs in the DCU. Now, obviously, this could be any major DCU superhero or villain, but I think it's Batman. And that's because I've also heard some things that I'm not going to share in this video because I want to wait until everything comes out so I don't make myself look stupid, because I'm not a scooper. But based on the sequence of events and all of the rumors that are coming out, I think that my source may be correct, so I'm leaning towards this being Batman, but again, take this with a grain of salt. That being said, if Batman does appear in this movie, I think that this movie will do a great job of laying the groundwork of Superman and Batman's dynamic. And this will be important because of a project that I have later on in this saga. Moving on to another potential prequel project for the DCU Batman, we have Dynamic Duo. Now, for those of you who don't know, Dynamic Duo is supposed to be an animated DC film that is focusing on Jason Todd and Dick Grayson both as Robin at the same time. And this movie has been described to be a Batman and Robin film, meaning that we probably will see Batman in this movie. However, as of right now, it is unclear whether or not this film is going to be set in the DCU or if it will be an Elseworld project. And James Gunn has even come out and said that he would want this film to be set in the DCU, but he's not sure if it can be due to the nature of its tale. That being said, it's important to note that since James Gunn said that, this film actually has undergone a rewrite. And I honestly think that the reason it's undergoing this rewrite is because James Gunn is trying to fit it within the DCU's continuity. Now, obviously, I do think that some fans might take issue with the idea of Dick Grayson and Jason Todd both being Batman's first Robins at the same time. However, like I've said before on TikTok and other videos on this app, I think if you really look at it, this might be a creative decision for the better. And that's because not only does it serve as a perfect way to condense Batman's timeline without getting rid of any major lore, it also strengthens the dynamic between Dick Grayson, Jason Todd, and Batman. Because now, instead of Dick Grayson having already left Batman's side before Jason Todd becomes Robin, you can have both of them grow up together and have a stronger dynamic as brothers while fighting side by side as Robins, which can not only naturally create a sibling rivalry between the two, but if they potentially go the route of Under the Red Hood and bring Jason Todd back, which is something I think the DCU will do, the shared history between the three will be much stronger than it is in the source material, because you'll still have the idea of Batman losing Jason Todd to the hands of the Joker, but you also gain the idea of Dick Grayson losing an actual brother to the hands of the Joker as well. And this isn't me saying that Dick Grayson doesn't already feel this way in the source material, because he does. I'm just saying that it makes the dynamic even stronger because now Dick Grayson has actually grown up with Jason Todd, whereas in the source material, he only mentored Jason Todd for about a year or so until he died. And by then, again, Dick was already Nightwing and outside of Wayne Manor. And for the people who really like the idea of Dick Grayson being the first Robin, which I completely understand, I think that that can still be salvaged with this vision, because you can make it so that Jason Todd and Dick Grayson both were training to be Robin, but Dick Grayson progressed in the training faster than Jason, leading to Batman ultimately deciding that Dick Grayson could go out on patrol with him before Jason could. And this would again be another layer to that sibling rivalry that will create natural tension between the two characters that could all come to a head in the Under the Red Hood adaptation. So I don't know about you guys, but I'm really hoping that this ends up being DCU, and I really hope that they go this route, because then as far as the timeline is concerned, you could have Batman be no later than year 10 by the time we see him in Brave and the Bold, which would line up perfectly with Superman, who by the time Brave and the Bold drops will be in year 6 if we assume that the DCU is going with linear time. This brings us to the first live action solo film for the DCU Batman, and that is none other than Brave and the Bold, which is going to feature him and Damian Wayne as Robin. Because a lot isn't really known about this film, all I'm going to do is give a potential rundown of what I think the plot is going to be, also the characters that I think will appear in this film, and also a quick rundown of Batman's timeline up until this point. Starting with the timeline, I think that Batman in this film will be no later than year 9 or 10, and again, I think that all of the major Batman events will have happened to this version of Batman. So for example, I do think that the events of Batman Year 1 will happen to this version of Batman, in which he returns to Gotham at around 26 to 27 in this universe, and then the events unfold. Fast forward to around the end of that year, I think that he will meet Dick Grayson and Jason Todd in the dynamic duo film, and I think the origins for both of those characters will largely be the same as how they are in the source material, with Dick Grayson obviously losing his parents at the circus and Jason Todd already being an orphan. I think that Batman will obviously adopt Dick Grayson after the murder of his parents. However, I think Dick Grayson will meet Jason in pursuit of Tony Zuko on the streets, because for those of you who don't know, after Dick Grayson's parents were murdered, he actually took it upon himself to try and hunt him down in the streets of Gotham by himself. During this journey, again, he will meet Jason Todd, who is already on the streets of Gotham. This would then lead to the two forming a friendship and/or pact, with Jason agreeing to help Dick Grayson hunt down Tony Zuko. With that being said, obviously Dick Grayson could have disagreements with Jason Todd and how he handles himself, because of the fact that at this point he's basically a criminal. However, because of the fact that Jason Todd himself doesn't really have any guidance, Dick Grayson will understand that this is the reality and he will stick alongside him anyway. This will all come to a head when Batman, who was also hunting down Tony Zuko, stumbles upon both Dick Grayson and Jason Todd in Crime Alley stealing the wheels of the Batmobile. Honestly, if I wrote this, I'd probably have Jason Todd be the only one stealing, and I'd just have Dick Grayson keeping watch. But nonetheless, like I already said, Dick Grayson will already be adopted by Bruce Wayne at this point. However, he won't know yet that Bruce Wayne is Batman. So when Batman finds the two, obviously he'll question the both of them, also question Jason Todd, which will eventually lead to him making the decision to take them both back to the Batcave and reveal himself as Bruce Wayne, which would effectively give us this iconic moment from Batman Year 3. The only difference is that Jason Todd will be there as well. And this will be when Bruce decides to adopt Jason, as well as starting the Robin training for both of them. After around a year or so of training, Dick Grayson will finally be allowed to step out with Batman as Robin, and he will officially be the first Robin. This would obviously be because of the fact that he progressed better than Jason did during the training, and you could honestly attribute that to Dick Grayson having an acrobat background. And like I said earlier, we would see this all play out in dynamic duo. So for around the first 2 months or so, Jason wouldn't be let out on patrol, but eventually he would be able to join the two. At this point, we're in the beginning of Batman Year 3, which is still technically lore accurate to the source material, because that is when Batman adopts Dick Grayson in the comics. The only difference is this is when he becomes Robin in this universe. I also think it's important to note that I would slightly age up Dick Grayson and Jason Todd when they're adopted, so that it better fits the timeline of the DCU. So instead of Dick Grayson being 8 years old when he's he's adopted by Batman, I would have him actually be adopted at 11 years old and debut as Robin at around 13. And I would have Jason Todd be 1 to 2 years younger at around 11. So from year 3 to year 6, I would have both Dick Grayson and Jason Todd operating alongside Batman as Robins. As far as stories like The Long Halloween, I'd have that take place during the year that Batman was training both Dick Grayson and Jason Todd to become Robin, because at that point they wouldn't be allowed to go out on patrol, so you could still have that be a solo Batman story. So that way when we get to years 3 to 6, Batman already has most of his rogues gallery established. And then we can get characters like Barbara Gordon to join the fold during year 4 or 5. I'd also have it so that year 3 is when David Corenswet's Superman actually debuts in the DCU. So essentially Batman's 3rd year is in 2022 and Superman's 1st year is also in 2022. So that way by the time we get to Superman 2025, Superman is now in year 3 like we are told in the movie, and Batman is in year 6. And it will be in this year that Dick Grayson starts to drift away from both Batman and Jason Todd and goes to seek out his own role. Because of him not yet being sure of what that role is, he will still operate as Robin, just solely with the Titans. Whereas Jason Todd would also still operate as Robin, just solo alongside Batman. And this, believe it or not, is also sort of lore accurate, because there was a time period in which Dick Grayson left the mantle of Robin but was still operating as Robin, while Bruce Wayne actually had Jason Todd just start as Robin. So now that that's been established, I would have year 6 be the darkest year of Batman's career. And that's because in this year, like I said, I would have Dick Grayson, who is 16 going on 17, leave Batman and go out on his own. A couple months later, I would have the events of Batman the Killing Joke take place, in which Barbara Gordon actually gets paralyzed by the Joker. About a month or so later after that, I would have Joker escape from Arkham Asylum yet again, and this would be when, while hunting the Joker down in Africa, Jason Todd will unfortunately be killed, giving us the iconic Death in the Family storyline. At this point in time, we're about 3 months or so into year 6, and so far, all of this has transpired, which would directly lead to Batman becoming a lot more aggressive when he's patrolling. This would also be the event that makes Dick Grayson completely ditch the role of Robin and step into the mantle of Nightwing with the guidance of Superman. And for those wondering, this would be set in the same year as Superman 2025. Moving on, because of Batman now being a lot more hostile on patrol, this leads right into the iconic A Lonely Place of Dying storyline, in which Tim Drake seeks out Batman. And this would obviously happen in line with how it happens in the comics, with Tim going to Dick Grayson first after deducing his identity and trying to get him to step back into the role of Robin, which would eventually lead to Tim becoming Robin himself towards the end of this year. I would also have the events of Batman the Sword of Azrael take place towards the end of this year as well, which would introduce Jean-Paul Valley Azrael into the fold. That being said, we're now effectively in the holiday season of Batman year 6, so think November, December. This would be when I have the iconic events of Knightfall take place. So for context, Tim Drake is still very new in the role of Robin. He's still actively being trained by Bruce, even though Bruce is allowing him to go out on patrol. He's basically training Tim as they go. And honestly, I would probably make it so that before even meeting Batman, Tim kind of has some martial arts experience because of his own interests, so that it kind of makes a little bit more sense to the audience. Moving on, after the crazy year 6 that Batman has already had thus far, this will be when Bane strikes after watching and studying Batman throughout this entire year, releasing all of Batman's villains from Arkham Asylum, and then breaking his back when he is fatigued, like it happens in the story. This would obviously put Batman out of commission and would force Jean-Paul Valley Azrael to take up the mantle of Batman, because of the fact that Batman's relationship with Dick Grayson at this point in time is rocky due to all of the events that transpired. This will lead us directly into the events of Night Quest and Night's End, and these events will go all the way through Batman year 7 because of the fact that Batman has to recover from his injured back. And at the end of this year, obviously Batman will fight Jean-Paul Valley Azrael and reclaim the mantle of Batman. It would be at this point in time that Batman also fully reconciles with Dick Grayson, and that will lead us into Batman year 8, in which now Batman is operating full-time again alongside Tim Drake as Robin. And with us now in 2027, this would be the same year that the events of Man of Tomorrow take place. Fast forward to a year later, in year 9, we now have the introduction of Damian Wayne in Batman Brave and the Bold. So at this point, we would now have a 36-year-old Batman, a Dick Grayson Nightwing who's around 19 going on 20, and a Tim Drake who is around 15 to 16 years old. Barbara Gordon, who is now Oracle, would also be around 21. And as for Damian Wayne, he would be 10 years old. As far as when Batman gets Talia al Ghul pregnant, they could go 2 routes. They can make it so that during Batman's training arc, he actually trained with Ra's al Ghul, and it was during this point in time that he impregnated Talia al Ghul unknowingly. unknowingly, which would mean Damian Wayne would actually be 10 years old by the time we see him in Brave and the Bold, because 10 years time would have passed. Or they could go the classic pre-crisis route of having Ra's al Ghul meet Batman after he's already been Batman for a couple of years during around year 4, and have this be when Batman's romance with Talia begins. And because of Talia meeting Batman in year 4 or year 5, you can make it so that Talia genetically modifies Damian Wayne to be physically 10 years old like it is in the source material. Either one of these routes would be fine, and it would still perfectly fit the timeline. As far as the story and plot of this film, it's already been stated by James Gunn that it's going to be pulling heavy inspiration from Batman and Son, written by Grant Morrison. I also think that in addition to that, because of the fact that it's being based off of that early arc of Grant Morrison's run, that it will also incorporate details from the resurrection of Ra's al Ghul, which is the second arc that Batman and Son directly ties into. Because of this, I think that this movie will spend a lot of its time building the lore of the League of Assassins, which is completely fine in my opinion, and I really think it makes sense to flesh out that aspect of Batman's lore and mythos if Damian Wayne is going to be one of the main characters. As far as the main villains of this film, obviously Ra's al Ghul would be the main antagonist, with Talia al Ghul being a supporting antagonist. I think Kirk Langstrom Man-Bat could also fill a role in this movie because of the fact that he supplies the League of Assassins with his Man-Bat serum at this point in time to give them ninja Man-Bats, which could also be a physical threat that Batman and the Batfamily members who are in this movie have to go up against. Because of this adapting the resurrection of Ra's al Ghul, I could also see them introducing other DC characters like the Sensei or Merlin, who is also a member of the League of Assassins. For those of you who aren't familiar with Batman and Son and the resurrection of Ra's al Ghul's storylines, effectively what happens is Damian Wayne obviously gets introduced to Batman, and that's because with Damian growing and Talia having to run the League of Assassins, she feels as if Damian needs to be with his father so that he can learn discipline. However, at this point in time, Talia al Ghul isn't actually aware that Ra's al Ghul isn't actually dead, and she's also oblivious to the fact that Ra's al Ghul made her conceive Damian with Bruce Wayne so that he could utilize Damian Wayne as a vessel for him to achieve true immortality, because of the fact that after a certain amount of uses, the Lazarus Pit is no longer as effective as it used to be. That being said, I obviously don't expect this movie to completely copy and paste what happens in the source material, but I do think that it would largely follow those storylines. The next project in this saga will be the first Nightwing solo project in the DCU, and that will be Nightwing Season 1. Like I've said in the past, I'm personally of the belief that a TV show would work a lot better for a character like Nightwing, similar to how a TV show works a lot better for a character like Daredevil. I think that giving us multiple episodes and more time to spend with the character will only benefit this character. And while Nightwing does have popular storylines, most of his popular storylines are with the Teen Titans, and if they're already going to be doing a Teen Titans trilogy, which I think they will be in the DCU, I think it just makes more sense to do Nightwing's solo adventures in a live-action TV show. So that way he's getting exposure on the big screen because of Titans, and also on the small screen because of his TV show. We'd also again just be able to see a lot more storylines play out this way as well. That being said, I'd want this season to loosely adapt the Night in Bloodhaven storyline, in which Dick Grayson finally steps into Bloodhaven. As far as the main antagonist of this season, I would want it to be Blockbuster, with side antagonists being the likes of Scarecrow, Lady Vic, and Shrike. I would also want this show to continue to showcase the depth of Dick Grayson and Batman's relationship. Obviously, even though the two have reconciled, they still have moments of tension, and I would want that to be present in this show, but I wouldn't want that to be the main focus of their relationship in this show, because I don't like to see Batman and Nightwing always at odds with each other. That being said, again, I do think that it is important to showcase the moments where they are at odds, so that when they aren't at odds, it pays off more. But overall, I would have the season end with Blockbuster's empire crippled and not ultimately defeated, and Bloodhaven finally starting to change under the watch of Nightwing. I would also end the season with a surprise cameo from Deathstroke the Terminator that sets up the future Teen Titans projects. Now, this next one is a project that probably isn't going to be set in the DCU, but in my opinion would be really cool if it was, and that is the animated Knightfall trilogy that we've actually been confirmed to be getting starting in 2026. And this trilogy was written by Jeremy Adams and is being directed by Jeff Wamister, who is known for the Tomorrowverse movies. And even though we don't know the cast of these movies, again, it's unlikely to be DCU because of the fact that the first movie is supposed to come out in 2026 and they haven't cast the DCU Batman yet, which will mean that they've already recorded the lines for this movie, and James Gunn has said that the DCU Batman, or not even just him, all actors are going to be playing their live action selves and also their animated selves. So unless these movies get rolled into the DCU canon, I highly doubt that they will be DCU canon. However, like I said, I really think it would be a good idea for these to be DCU canon, considering that they're going to basically one-to-one adapt the Knightfall storyline. And as I already explained in my timeline, I would have Knightfall take place for the DCU Batman, and I would have it play out pretty much exactly how it happens in the comics. So everything that happens in these three movies could easily be rolled into the DCU. And then it would also serve as a great prequel story for characters like Tim Drake, Bane, and Jean-Paul Valley Azrael. We would also be able to see Nightwing in his very early days of becoming Nightwing. That being said, even though these movies technically aren't DCU canon, it would still be cool if you could watch these films as if they were DCU canon and still kind of fit the puzzle pieces to Batman's timeline. It's also important to note that Frank Grillo, who is Rick Flag Sr. in this universe, did tease a while back that Knightfall is one of James Gunn's favorite stories. And then lo and behold, the confirmation for this trilogy came out. So again, I'm not saying it's DCU, but I think it would be really cool if it was. And to be honest, if the voice actors in these movies aren't going to be the same as the actual actors in the DCU, I think James Gunn could just come out and say afterwards, hey, we didn't have the actual DCU Batman cast at this point, so that's why we had different voice actors, but this movie is DCU canon. I think that would solve all the issues. This brings me to the next project in this Batman saga, and even though it doesn't feature Batman, I still think it will be very integral to the Batman mythos, and that is the Bane and Deathstroke team-up movie. Now, so far, not much is known about this film. However, after Peacemaker Season 2, I think we have a much better guess of what this film could potentially be about. For those of you who aren't aware, obviously at the end of Peacemaker Season 2, they introduced Salvation, which is a planet that they are going to be housing evil metahumans on. With Bane and Deathstroke both fitting that criteria, it makes sense that both of them would be stationed on this planet for their prison sentences because no jails on Earth can really hold them. Because of the fact that other dangerous metahumans will also be inhabiting this planet, I think that this movie will be about Bane and Deathstroke teaming up to survive the conditions of said planet. And through this, we could see a whole bunch of other villain interactions. We could potentially get Bane and Deathstroke versing Killer Croc or Clayface or Mr. Freeze, etc. And this obviously wouldn't just be limited to Batman villains. It's also important to note that this project does have a script that was submitted and it was written by Matthew Orton, so it is possible that we see this project sooner rather than later. This next project is another one of the main reasons as to why I want the animated Knightfall trilogy to be DCU canon, and that is because this project is Sword of Azrael Season 1. And if you've been watching my content, you know that I've mentioned this project before in other videos, but effectively I would want this to adapt Azrael 1995, written by Dennis O'Neil. And the beginning of that run is set directly after the events of Knightfall. And for those of you who don't know, the beginning arcs of this run showcase Jean-Paul Valley's path to redemption after what he did during Knightfall, and also him uncovering the truth about the Order of Saint Dumas. Because of that, for this season, I would want the main antagonist to obviously be the Order of Saint Dumas, and I would want this show to focus on fleshing out the backstory and lore of Azrael. So that way, when he pops up in other DCU Batman projects, we already know who he is as a character. This next project is a project that I've also referenced a ton in the past, and that is none other than the World's Finest project. Because of the fact that I've already talked about this project a lot, I'm just going to give a brief rundown, and essentially what I would want this story to adapt is Superman Batman Public Enemies. And like I've said before, I think after Man of Tomorrow, this is the perfect stepping stone and the perfect story to adapt for the World's Finest, considering that Lex Luthor will obviously be on his redemption arc, and I think it'll lead to him becoming president in the DCU. Because of this, you could pretty much adapt this story one-to-one. You could have Lex be the president, and you can have him put a bounty on Superman's head, which leads to a bunch of heroes and villains trying to stop Superman and Batman. The end of this movie would obviously showcase the defeat of Lex Luthor again, and it would actually land him on Salvation with the rest of the other deadly metahumans. And again, if you've been following me and watching my videos, you know that this is how I would set up a Legion of Doom versus the Justice League movie. The second movie in the DCU Batman trilogy is going to be Batman Under the Red Hood. And obviously you guys can tell based on the title that this is going to adapt the iconic Under the Red Hood storyline in which Jason Todd Robin returns from the dead as Red Hood. I would pretty much want this to be a one-to-one adaptation. The only real tweaks that I would add is that I would incorporate the entirety of the Bat family into this story because of the fact that obviously we'll have Damian Wayne already, characters like Jean-Paul Valley Azrael will be in the mix, Nightwing, etc, etc. So I would basically want Jason Todd Red Hood to be strategically targeting all the members of the Bat family and not just Batman and Nightwing. That being said, I would still want most of the focus to be on both Batman and Nightwing, considering that Jason Todd will have had the strongest dynamic with those two. And like I said earlier, if you make dynamic duo DCU canon and you make Jason Todd and Dick Grayson Robin at the same time, it makes the payoff of this movie way more significant. And I also want to add that if done correctly, this movie could easily gross like $2 billion. The next project that I would have in this saga would be Birds of Prey Season 1. And like I said in my original Batman saga video, I don't really know what I would want the specific plot of this story to be. I would just want this project to exist specifically for the idea of fleshing out the street tier realm of the DCU. So obviously you'd have the original Birds of Prey roster in Oracle, Huntress, Black Canary, and Lady Blackhawk. But I'd also have this story introduce the likes of Cassandra Cain, making the main antagonists of this show Lady Shiva and David Cain. And again, because this is a Batman saga, you could also have Batman and other Bat family members show up from time to time throughout the show. In addition addition to Batman appearing, like I said, I do want this to flesh out the street tier area, so I wouldn't be opposed to characters like Bronze Tiger, Connor Hawk, Richard Dragon, Constantine Draken, Green Arrow, and many other DC street tiers appearing in this show. Because this season of Birds of Prey is going to introduce Cassandra Cain, I would also want the season to end with the earthquake that destroyed Gotham City and set the stage for No Man's Land and Batman Cataclysm. Now, this next project is a project that probably isn't happening at all anymore in the DCU because of the direction that they're taking, and that is the Arkham Asylum series. Now, personally, the reason why I don't think that this project is going to happen anymore is because the DCU obviously has set up Salvation, and this is where most of the metahumans that are evil are going to be housed, meaning that a lot of Batman's rogues gallery probably won't be occupying Arkham Asylum anymore. And we even get told in Peacemaker Season 2 in like the first episode that a lot of villains break out of Arkham Asylum. So I just think it's really likely that we see a lot of Batman's villains on Salvation. That being said, I do think that Salvation will ultimately set up the Legion of Doom and they will escape from Salvation, which would inevitably lead to Salvation being canned as a prison. So in the event that that happens, if they do decide to use Arkham Asylum again, but obviously just reinforce it so that villains can escape easier, I think that this project still makes a lot of sense. And if they did go that route, the way that I would adapt this series is that I would have every episode be about a specific Batman rogue. So I would essentially showcase the origin of each Batman rogue that the episode is focusing on, and I would showcase their prime and their downfall in which Batman stops them. Pretty much like the Almost Got Him episode from Batman the Animated Series. That being said, towards the end of the season, it would actually be revealed that this show was taking place parallel to the Birds of Prey season, and the earthquake that levels Gotham City at the end of Birds of Prey will also happen at the end of the Arkham Asylum series. And this would lead to yet again another escape from the Arkham villains, setting the stage for the third film in the DCU Batman's first trilogy, Batman No Man's Land. Obviously, from the sound of the title, this movie is going to largely adapt the No Man's Land storyline from the source material. That being said, I want this movie to showcase Cassandra Cain fully stepping into the mantle of Batgirl. And on top of that, even though this is a Batman movie, it will still be very Bat-family centric. So throughout the film, we'll see the POV of other Bat-family members like Nightwing, Cassandra Cain, Oracle, Tim Drake, Azrael, etc. And it will basically showcase how all of these Bat-family members are helping the people of Gotham through this catastrophe. As far as the main antagonist of this film, I would want it to be a large majority of Batman's rogues gallery. And what I mean by this is I would want pretty much all of Batman's major rogues to have a significant role in the plot of this film. And that's mostly because of the fact that after this earthquake pretty much annihilates Gotham City, there's no real stability or structure in the city, creating the perfect opportunity for a lot of the rival villains to try and grab the power. So we could see things like the Joker and his gang members being one faction of Gotham City. We could also see the Penguin and his gang being another faction. We could see Two-Face and his crew. We could even throw Bane in the mix, Poison Ivy, etc. Basically, I would want this movie to be like a playthrough of an Arkham game, where in one night, Batman alongside the Bat family have to go through a plethora of his rogues gallery to restore order to the city. I feel like this as a concept would be the greatest Batman piece of media to ever touch the big screen. And that again is how I would cap off the first half of the DCU Batman saga, and this brings us to the latter half. At this point in the DCU, we'll most likely be a little over a decade in, which means things like the Justice League will have already been fully established, and we probably would have already gotten our first big crisis event in the DCU. With that being said, for you guys to truly understand how the rest of this Batman saga is going to play out, I would recommend watching my Justice League saga video, because a lot of the events that happen in that video are going to work in tandem with the events that happen in this latter half of Batman saga. First things first, if you guys did watch my Justice League saga video, you know that I ended that saga with Final Crisis. And effectively, I had it loosely adapt the exact events from the comic in which Batman dies fighting Darkseid. Or at least he's thought to be dead. This ties into the next part of Batman's saga because this is the exact point that we're going to pick up at. This brings me to Nightwing Season 2. And long story short, I would want this season to fully adapt the Battle for the Cowl storyline. For those of you who don't know, after the death of Batman in Final Crisis, Battle for the Cowl basically features the entire Bat family fighting for the mantle of Batman. So we see the likes of Tim Drake fighting for the Cowl, Dick Grayson, Jason Todd, and all the other Bat family members play a role in the story. I would have the main plot of the story pretty much be one-to-one to that. However, there would be some tweaks that I would have to make, considering that members like Jean-Paul Azrael would still be in the mix. And I think a really cool way to add Azrael to this story is to help him aid Dick Grayson in claiming the mantle of Batman. And this is because Jean-Paul has already taken up the mantle of Batman before, obviously when Batman got his back broken by Bane. And because of the damage that he did while acting as Batman, I don't think that Jean-Paul would be eager to pick up the mantle and be the main Batman again. And because of his dynamic with Dick Grayson, which at this point in the DCU should be fully fleshed out, he'll look to him as the true successor of the Cowl. And because Battle for the Cowl already shows a lot of the contestants for the Cowl in their own Batman costumes, I think it would be really cool to see Jean-Paul Azrael don his Knightfall Batman costume in support of Dick Grayson. Very similar to what we just saw in the Nocturne arc written by Ram V in Detective Comics. That being said, I would only want the Battle for the Cowl storyline to take place for only like the first half of the season. And that's specifically because if we're looking at a TV show, we get an hour of content in each episode. I really do think that you can tell the Battle for the Cowl storyline in 5 episodes max. And I think that limiting filler in this season would be really ideal for the story. So for the latter half of the season, I would definitely have an overarching villain or threat that would be the main villain for the season, and I would personally adapt Black Mirror. And for those of you who don't know, the villain of Black Mirror is James Gordon Jr., who is Commissioner Gordon's son, who is now a rabid serial killer. I think that Black Mirror has the perfect plot that you could cook alongside Battle for the Cowl in the initial episodes of the season. And you can obviously have Gotham needing a new Batman play a pivotal role in how the storyline resolves itself. So again, at around episode 5, I would have Dick Grayson fully step into the role of Batman, and that would be pretty much the episode when we get the epic reveal. And then for the final 3 episodes, I would have it pretty much be him cracking down on James Gordon Jr. And granted, this is me assuming that this season is only 8 episodes. We could get a Netflix Daredevil style season with this series, and it could end up being like 10 or 13 episodes. Obviously, the more episodes, the better, but I think that it works whether it's 8 episodes or 13. So very quickly, just to add context, post Nightwing season 2, Dick Grayson will be the current Batman. So any DCU events or team-ups that are happening at this point in time that include Batman will feature Dick Grayson as Batman. Now personally, if it were up to me, I wouldn't have this period be any longer than 2 years, because I do think that people have an insane obsession with Bruce Wayne. I'm included in that group. So I think the Dick Bats trope could get really tired for a lot of casual fans and fans of Bruce Wayne. And when I say 2 years, I mean 2 years in real life. So if Nightwing season 2 happens in 2031, for example, I would say by 2033, I would be moving into this next project. And that next project, ladies and gentlemen, is the return of Bruce Wayne. And I would have this project be a single season HBO Max series that, as you can tell from the title, literally showcases the return of Bruce Wayne. Now, for those of you who don't know, when Batman died in Final Crisis, he didn't actually die, because when Darkseid blasted him with his Omega effect, he simply sent him through time. So what this show would focus on is Batman going through time and making his way back to the main timeline. Another main focus of this show would be Tim Drake, who would now be operating as Red Robin after the events of Battle for the Cowl, and his purpose will be doing detective work trying to figure out what actually happened to Batman, because he would be of the opinion that Batman never actually died in Final Crisis, which is also lore accurate because that's what happens in the comics as well. That being said, the finale of the show will showcase both storylines of Tim Drake and Bruce Wayne intersecting, in which Batman will return to the current timeline and he will greet all of the Bat family. And this will lead to Dick Grayson obviously giving him back the mantle of Batman, and Dick Grayson having improved so much as a hero, making him even more ready for him returning to the mantle of Nightwing. Following the return of Bruce Wayne, we would then pick up with Jason Todd Red Hood in Red Hood and the Outlaws. Now personally, I'm pretty torn on whether or not I would want this to be a movie or whether or not I would want this to be a TV show. I think that Red Hood genuinely has enough pull for this to work as a movie, and because of the fact that he wasn't a large focus for most of this Batman saga, I think that a movie would also make sense. But then again, if it was a TV show, we'd get to spend a lot more time with the character, and I think because of the fact that DC has done 2 Suicide Squad films already, I think the trope of a bunch of outlaws banding together is kind of played out. Either way, I would want this project to loosely adapt Red Hood and the Outlaws from 2016, written by Scott Lobdell. For the roster, I would want it to be Red Hood, Artemis, Bizarro, Starfire, and obviously Roy Harper. And I would largely want this show to focus on Red Hood's dynamics with his team, obviously, and more so his path to reconciling his trauma with the Joker. And I want that to be the main focus of the show, because I don't want Red Hood to be stuck in the same loop of character regression in the DCU like how he is in the comics. Moving on to the next project, we are now up to the 4th live-action action Batman movie in this universe, and that movie is going to be Batman Joker War. This movie would obviously be set not too long after the events of No Man's Land, in which Gotham City is still pretty much in a weakened state. Obviously, Bruce Wayne did a great job of helping fund rebuild the city before he died in Final Crisis, but the city is still on its way to recovering. Because of this, Joker still sees this as an opportunity to try and reclaim power in the city. I would also introduce Ghostmaker in this film, very similar to how he is introduced in the source material. For those of you who don't know, Bruce Wayne and Ghostmaker actually go way back because they were best buddies at one point during Bruce Wayne's training arc that led up to him becoming Batman in the first place. What drifted the two apart is their moral compasses, because Ghostmaker is completely fine with killing and obviously Bruce Wayne is not. The reason why Ghostmaker would return in this movie is because after the events of No Man's Land, he would feel as if Batman Bruce Wayne is unfit to be the protector of Gotham, so he would return to challenge him for that mantle. And when I say mantle, I don't mean mantle of Batman, I mean mantle of the protector of Gotham. Obviously, this movie would also incorporate the other Batfamily members as well. Moving on to the fifth movie in the DCU Batman saga, I have Batman Fear State. And if you couldn't tell based on the title, the main villain of this story is going to be none other than Scarecrow. And this will obviously loosely adapt the story written by James Tynion. As for the actual storyline of this film, again after the events of No Man's Land in the DCU and now Joker War, obviously Gotham City will be in a much better state than it was right after No Man's Land, but Gotham would still be trying to strengthen their crime fighting ability. This would be the doorway that introduces us to characters like Simon Saint. For those of you who don't know, Simon Saint is the CEO of Saint Industries and is directly responsible for the Peacekeeper Initiative, which is basically creating superhuman cops with robot cybernetics. By extension of this, we would also be introduced to the character of Sean Mahoney, who in the comics is a survivor and hero who was injured during the City of Bane and Joker War storylines. And when I say injured, I mean he was really injured. He lost both of his legs and one of his arms. That being said, he will be the first to actually volunteer for this Peacekeeper program and receive the cybernetic enhancements. And this would lead to him becoming Peacekeeper 01, who will be another antagonist for this storyline and basically the physical confrontation that Batman has. As far as his powers and abilities, obviously he's superhuman because of his cybernetic enhancements, but he also has the ability to adapt to Batman's fighting style because of said enhancements, and he's also equipped with guns and very powerful energy weapons that are also again specifically engineered to deal with Batman level threats. As far as Scarecrow's role, he'll be the main antagonist pulling the strings behind every event. The reason why everyone in Gotham is so willing to allow Simon Saint and his Peacekeeper initiative go forward is because of the fact that Scarecrow will have actually infected Gotham with a new strain of fear toxin, and that fear toxin will obviously cause everyone to be afraid, but it would more so cause them to have irrational thinking, which would make them okay with accepting this absolute control because of the fact that they don't feel confident in Gotham's ability to protect itself. Because of this, the fear toxin that Scarecrow uses won't need to be that strong because a lot of this fear will already be present because of the events of No Man's Land. And Scarecrow will obviously also be manipulating Simon Saint, which would lead to Peacekeeper 01, aka Sean Mahoney, becoming a villain. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we move to the last installment of this DCU Batman saga, and this movie is called Batman Failsafe. And again, if you couldn't tell by the title, it's obviously going to adapt Failsafe, written by Chip Zdarsky. And this movie also ties into my Justice League saga because for those of you who haven't seen that video, in that video, one of the Justice League movies that I have is Justice League Tower of Babel. And for those of you who don't know, that is the iconic storyline in which Batman creates his contingency plans for the Justice League. And if you guys aren't familiar with Failsafe, Failsafe is actually Batman's contingency plan that he created for himself alongside the other contingencies that he made for the Justice League. However, Batman isn't aware that he created this contingency plan because in true Batman fashion, after he created it, he wiped it from his memory so that anytime he crossed the line, Failsafe would activate and hunt him down. There's also a really cool moment in the Failsafe story that I would want to see in this movie where Superman and Batman have a flashback scene that takes place right after Tower of Babel, in which Superman asks Batman, what's the contingency plan for Batman, the man who is prepared for everything? And obviously we know that in that moment Batman says the Justice League. However, because of the fact that he wiped his memory, he's unaware that the actual contingency plan is Failsafe. Not only do I think that this is a great story to adapt for Batman, I think it also would put to bed a lot of misconceptions about Batman in terms of him being a poor hero who only makes contingencies for his friends and doesn't plan for himself, because he literally does plan for himself, so much so that he doesn't even remember the plan. And this movie could be a real showcase of how intelligent and good of a hero Batman is, because Failsafe is literally a super android that's created with a mesotech and also has all of the skills and abilities of Batman. Not only that, but he's also enhanced to be able to physically contend members of the Justice League like Martian Manhunter and Superman. And because Batman is framed with murder in this story, Failsafe is hunting him down. So effectively, Batman is trying to outmaneuver his worst nightmare. It's a version version of himself that is not only significantly stronger and faster, but has all of the skills and resources that he does. And this movie would obviously end with Batman having to outsmart Failsafe and destroy him. Obviously, this would be a little bit different from the comics because in the source material, Batman doesn't actually win against Failsafe. He does temporarily outsmart him, but Failsafe still sends him through time or the multiverse, which is something that we already literally just did in this saga, so I don't want to repeat that same story. And Failsafe does also stick around for a little bit longer because he's one of the main antagonists in the Absolute Power storyline. And honestly, now that I think about it, we'd be way further down the line in the DCU at this point, so I could honestly see them going the Absolute Power route with Amanda Waller, considering the history between metahumans and the government, especially at this point in the DCU. So honestly, if they wanted to adapt this movie more one-to-one with the comic to set up Absolute Power in the DCU, I actually wouldn't even be opposed to that. And again, with metahumans and the government already being at odds this early on in the DCU, I could definitely see a future where Amanda Waller gets power hungry and creates the Absolute Power storyline. But ladies and gentlemen, that is going to wrap up my ultimate DCU Batman saga. If you have made it this far into the video, I greatly appreciate you because this is my longest video to date. But it honestly had to be this long because I had to give you guys my entire Batman saga, especially considering I kind of already made the first half of this video in another video. But if you guys enjoyed this video, please be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and share. Also hit that hype button for me because it would mean a lot. And as always, it's been K the Guide, and I will catch you boys in the next one.